Good evening. Welcome to evening service. I'm glad you all are here. We're going to open our time together by singing a song together. This is number 41 in the chorus books. That's 41 in the chorus books. Otherwise, you can just stand and look over there. We're going to sing As the Deer. As the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longeth after thee. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee. I want you more than any other, only you can satisfy. You alone are the real joy giver and the apple of my eye. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee. You're my friend, and you are my brother, even though you are a king. I love you more than any other, so much more than anything. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee. Brother Keith Lewis, will you please open our service in prayer?
Hey, thanks so much. Please be seated. I love that song, don't you? Just to be able to sing that and hear the piano, it's just awesome. I love the whole image of just me and God. And I'm sure you put yourself there, just you and God. And Pastor Josh does a great job with that. I'm almost ready to ask him to play Beulah and sing Beulah Land, but I'm not going to anytime soon. But now, if you all want to, I can't help that. Anyway, it's good to have you tonight. I hope you had a good afternoon. Had a great day yesterday with the spring fling, and a good time this morning in the morning service and communion, and just a great time. So open your bulletins there. I just want to remind you of a couple of things. We've got a good number for the ladies' mother-daughter celebration back there. If you haven't signed up yet, please do so. And, you know, there's always going to be extra, so don't think that if you don't sign up or you're just not sure, just whenever you do figure it out, let us know, and we'll be more than happy to throw a couple more hot dogs on the grill. Not turkey? You requested turkey? Oh, my goodness. Anyway, there's not going to be dogs of any sort, so your dinner will be much better than that. And if you can, just talk that up. But that's coming this Friday at 6 o'clock, the mother-daughter celebration. And, you know, next Sunday is Mother's Day, and we'll have a little bit of extra for that as well. Don't forget this coming Wednesday, if you know of somebody in Awana, remind them that they can come dressed as your favorite hero from the Bible. So if you can remind them of that, I'm sure that they would come all dressed up. And our Awana is basically from ages 2 or 3 up through the 5th grade. And then our middle school, high schoolers are downstairs, both of them Wednesday at 6:30. Also, this coming Saturday at 7 p.m., I need you to spread the word large and loud. You know, the Gospel Harmony boys are going to be here in our spring concert. So please invite some folks. The only thing that would be more embarrassing if there were more in the quartet than there was in the congregation. So come out, support that. Decide right now that you're going to be here. I guarantee you something's going to pop up and you'll think, oh, if I didn't have that, I'd go to the concert. Don't allow that to happen. Be praying for the Gospel Harmony boys. They're traveling all over the place, and they're singing their little hearts out, honoring God the way that they can. And we're going to have them here with us. That'll be Saturday at 7 p.m., okay? Boxes. You can read on there, Leah needs boxes. She's making a castle, right? A castle this year. We've seen the very interactive volcano that actually had pretty close, as close as you could possibly be to real molten lava coming down through it. And then big boulders last year that kind of moved. It's just a great time. I'm excited about Vacation Bible School as well. It's always a good time. Our Vacation Bible School will start with young folks and go all the way through adult. There'll be an adult class here every night, all the way back down through. So if you are very young, or you're kind of in the middle, or you're very mature, there's something here for you, okay? That's all the announcements I have. I'm going to ask the ushers to come down, and we'll take up our Sunday evening tithes and offerings. Brother Steve, would you bless our offering, sir, please?
Our Heavenly Father, Lord, we just thank you for calling us here, Lord, that we might gather to hear your word, what you would have for us, Lord. Be with the pastor as he brings forth and breaks the word of life, Lord, that we might go out and share it with others that don't know you. Lord, lead us to the one that's lost. Let us be the witness for you and tell of your loving grace. We thank you for the opportunity you give us to give back to you what you've blessed us with, Lord. Take this offering and use it to glorify your name. And in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Steve.
All right, let's sing one more song, this time out of the Blue Hymnals. This is 456 in the Blue Hymnals. We're going to sing together, "Oh, for 1,000 Tongues to Sing." Oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing my great Redeemer's praise, the glories of my God and King, the triumphs of his grace. My gracious Master and my God assist me to proclaim, to spread through all the earth abroad the honors of thy name. Jesus, the name that calms our fears, that bids our sorrows cease. 'Tis music in the sinner's ears, 'tis life and health and peace. Greet your neighbor this evening. Happily.
Everything, my son? Need anything?
Well, welcome back to our Sunday evening sermon series in the book of Leviticus, the book of holiness. Quit that, Josh. It's too early for that stuff. I'll throw something at you. No sleeping. For those of you on the live stream, Josh wasn't really sleeping. He just had a yawn. Everybody's entitled to a yawn. So, if you have a Bible, you can go ahead and find your way to Leviticus chapter 11. We're not going to be in that chapter exclusively, nor are we going to read the entirety of the thing. Remember, this sermon series is taking the book of Leviticus in large chunks. And so if you recall from, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, we were in chapters 1 through 7. We had sort of an introduction to Leviticus, and then we concentrated last week on the priesthood from chapters 8 through 10. And then if you're the type of person that likes to take notes and keep track, we're going to be in chapters 11 through 16 tonight, okay? Not the entire thing. I'm not going to read all the way through, but those are the reference chapters, okay? So in almost every situation, there's a main thing and at least one secondary thing. There's a main purpose, a main goal, and then there's a secondary purpose that shoots off from the main one. All right. Now, for example, the main goal of an airline flight is to get passengers from point A to point B. Secondary goals include things like comfort, safety, following regulations, making sure that you don't bump into other planes while you're in the air. And the secondary goals are they're useful and they're necessary and they're vital to the success of the main goal. But still, the main thing is the main thing. That's to get passengers from point A to point B. Recently, it's been in my experience that not even airlines can do that. They'll put me on a plane and say, sorry, we can't go to where you want to go. Why can't you go to where I want to go? They've lost track of the main thing. All right, I still get my peanuts. I still get my complimentary coffee. But the main thing of an airline flight is to go from one place to the other. Now, it's important to think of things in such terms, okay? I want you to think this evening those minute details. And I want you to apply that to the Christian life, because we love to get caught up in our Christianity. We love to get caught up in it, and we lose focus of the main thing. And we might lapse and trade out the main thing for the secondary thing and say, okay, now we're going to focus on the secondary thing, and we're going to build everything that we believe and how we think and our attitudes based on the secondary thing. We love to focus on the details of ministry or the Christian life, that we lose focus on what's really, truly at the core, at the foundation, important. Think of it this way. We get caught up in how we should serve God, and we lose track of why we should serve God. Or we get caught up in the ways in which we execute our service or our church attendance or something like that, and we forget why we even come to church in the first place. We don't do it on purpose. It's not done with malice. But when you lose track of the main thing, sometimes secondary things supplant that, and we begin to focus on that. Notice here, this is an either-or. This is not an either-or type of situation. It's not binary, okay? Both of them are important. Both of them are necessary, and yet one is more important and more necessary than the other. Both the main things and the secondary things apply. And you might be wondering, Josh, what in the world are you talking about? And so this evening I'm going to answer that question. Using Leviticus 11 through 16, I want to explore the nature of the rituals and the regulations regarding cleanliness among the nation of Israel, or more importantly, the prescriptions to treat uncleanness. And I want to use that to explain the nature of the main thing and the necessity of the secondary things. You see, as a part of his law, God ordered and detailed the lives of his people very specifically, all the way down to the mundane, the boring stuff, the boring little details, the everyday aspects. And the question that I want to ask is this: what can we learn from these chapters of Leviticus, this book of holiness, and how it applies to us today? Let's just take chapter 11 as our example, okay? So I'm going to begin reading from verse 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses and to Aaron, saying unto them, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, These are the beasts which ye shall eat among all the beasts that are on the earth. Whatsoever parteth the hoof, and is cloven-footed, and cheweth the cud among the beasts, that shall ye eat. Nevertheless, these shall ye not eat, of them that chew the cud, or of them that divide the hoof, as the camel, because he cheweth the cud, but divideth not the hoof, he is unclean unto you. And the coney, because he cheweth the cud, but divideth not the hoof, he is unclean unto you. And the hare, because he cheweth the cud, but divideth not the hoof, he is unclean to you. And the swine, though he divide the hoof and be cloven-footed, yet he cheweth not the cud, he is unclean to you. Of their flesh shall ye not eat, and their carcass shall ye not touch, they are unclean to you. Now this is where, by and large, you might have even made your way through chapter 10 of Leviticus. But right here in chapter 11, usually this is where the Bible reading plans go to die. All right? You make it this far in your yearly Bible reading plan, you're doing a really good job. And now we're starting to talk about cloven-footed and chewing the cud, and it's like, huh? What does that even mean? And so it's our goal this evening to decipher that. It's our goal this evening to decipher that, but also on top of that in chapter 12, talking about the uncleanliness of the people themselves. We'll get to that in just a little bit. The first thing that we can learn from these chapters is this: we can learn that the main thing is holiness. Okay? In the book of Leviticus, you've heard me say it time and again, driving it home ad nauseum. This is a book of holiness. The goal of Leviticus is to get across God's holiness and his expectation of holiness for his people. So, I just read to you the beginnings of some dietary restrictions, some statutes, some regulations that regard what these people could or could not eat, depending. All right? Now, before we begin, I want to establish a quick guideline. Excuse me. The dietary regulations weren't really about diet. All right? Did you hear that? The dietary regulations weren't really about diet. Now, most people know that modern Jews, today, they practice certain dietary and other restrictions, but I'm going to focus on the dietary. Even if we don't know all the specifics, there are things that they are not allowed to eat according to their beliefs. They're drawn right here from the book of Leviticus. Okay, we're not allowed to eat these things. And it's important to understand God's true reason behind those regulations, because quite frankly, if we take them at face value, these restrictions, they seem to make very little sense. You read through them and you're thinking to yourself, why is God restricting these but not these? Or what was the point of that? Why, I didn't even know they had rabbits in the desert. What in the world is a coney? All right? These are the questions that come up whenever we're reading through these things. But there's purpose. Okay? There's purpose in these regulations. Scholars have suggested a bunch of reasons, such as health and hygiene, regarding these dietary restrictions. You might have heard them yourself. I've read them myself. And, for example, some have said that you might contract a disease from eating undercooked pork. Okay? That's one example. Others have looked for a spiritual angle. Maybe certain animals were off limits because they were connected to paganism or ritualism or death of the religions around them. Animals such as scavenging birds, they feed on carcasses, or animals that crawled on the ground like the serpent in the Garden of Eden. We love to look at that and say, this must be why God restricted consuming these particular animals. This must be the reason. Now, it's possible there may be some validity in those connections. It's possible that it's a fair assumption or a fair conclusion that even today you eat undercooked pork. You're taking a risk, brothers and sisters. Okay, so it's possible that was a side effect, but that's not the actual reason as to why God gave the dietary restrictions. For that, we go to Scripture itself. In Leviticus chapter 11, beginning in verse 43, it says this: "You shall not make yourselves abominable." Okay? Abominable. This is my favorite word in ancient Hebrew. It has no real true English translation. There's not a nasty enough English word to describe this Hebrew word. Would you like to know what it is? Tobah. Everybody say Tobah. I've gone around the house and I've tried to explain to Leah how gross something is. And I can't explain it using English words, so I'll tell her it's Tobah. Okay? That's the kind of word we're looking at here. It has no true, straightforward English connection. It is abominable. It says here in beginning of verse 43, "You shall not make yourselves Tobah, or abominable, with creeping thing that creepeth, neither shall you make yourselves unclean with them, that ye should be defiled thereby. For I am the Lord your God. Ye shall therefore sanctify yourselves, and ye shall be holy." There's the word, you guys. "For I am holy. Neither shall ye defile yourselves with any manner of creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. For I am the Lord that bringeth you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. Ye shall therefore be holy, for I am holy." And so we have our reason right there in that passage. Several buzzwords. You got abominable that we just talked about, but you also have defiled. You have sanctify. The contrast, it couldn't be any more stark. You've got abominable, defiled, Tobah, if you eat those things. If you don't eat those things, you sanctify yourselves. You make yourselves holy. Why? Because God is holy. So we're drawing a dividing line right here. God is connecting the eating of certain things with a defiling, not against the person, but against God. They are abominable to him if they eat these certain things. In other words, God didn't say, don't eat this because it's unhealthy for you. If that were the reason, I promise you that's what he would have said. What he did say was, don't eat this because doing so would damage your holiness that extends from your God. It's that typical antithetical thinking that was very typical of God. If you do things this way, you worship me. If you do things that way, you don't worship me. And you've heard it before, I've preached it before, and this is true from the scriptures, that we, by our very nature, we worship something. We're always worshipers. We're always worshiping something. We're always wanting to give our worship to something. Jesus was an even greater divider of that one. He said, if you're not worshiping God, you're worshiping Satan. That's it. That's the statement. Only two choices. And so what God is saying here is, if you eat these things, you're no longer holy unto me. You're not going to die. You might get sick, but that's not the reason why I'm telling you not to eat these things. God is telling his people not to eat these things because it would damage their holiness toward him. So he's using dietary restrictions to make a point. He was teaching his people to live opposite to the peoples around them, to live unique, to live different, sanctified, holy, separated, set apart, off to the side. Who eats pigs? The Canaanites might, but not the Israelites. Who eats birds of prey? The Amorites might, but not Israel. Who eats fish without scales? Well, the Philistines might, but not Israel. For no other reason, because they are not them. They are different. They are sanctified. They are separated out. And as I said before, there are many functional reasons for the dietary restrictions, but don't get caught up in them. Okay, don't get caught up in them. This is a lesson in holiness. We might imagine the people of Israel looking up and asking, why, Lord? Why can't we eat certain things? Is it because they're unhealthy? Is it because they're prone to parasites? And God answers, no, you can't eat those things because that's what they eat. You see those people over there? That's the promised land. Your descendants are going to go there someday. That's what they're like. That's what they do. You shall not worship any other god because that's the gods they worship. You're going to worship this God. You shall not dress a certain way because that's how they dress. You dress my way. You shall not eat certain things because that's what they eat, and you're different. You're unique. You're not like them. You're special. You're chosen. God says, you're mine. And so with these dietary restrictions, he's dividing it out even further to say, I want you to be holy. His holiness, God's holiness, extending from himself to his people. And then he's giving them a prescription on how to do it. Here's the main thing. Stay holy. Remain holy. Don't get caught up in the mundane or the secondaries. And it's still the expectation of God today. The mindset must pervade everything we say, we think, and we do. Don't live like the world. Ask the question. Okay, what's the word? The world is really good at showing itself off. The world is wickedly prideful. The world loves to show itself off. It's not a secret, even for the most sequestered Christian, to understand what the world is like. And so you look at that and say, okay, I'm not supposed to be like that. How does that manifest itself? Many, many, many ways. I'm not going to go through every single detail, you guys. I don't have that time, and neither do you. What I am saying is what the world is doing, Christians ought not be doing. Make sense? It's a general rule, okay? It's the main thing. It's this whole idea of holiness. Now, pause. Don't make the mistake in thinking that you have to cloister yourself away. Or make yourself so different and so unique that you begin to stand out even amongst your own brothers and sisters, to the point of looking, quite frankly, weird. No, we're not supposed to cloister ourselves away. We're not supposed to hide away in a cave and pray exclusively 24/7. What we ought to do is we have to take our holiness and walk hand in hand with our commission to tell others about God. Paul was a master of this. Paul was really good at this. Paul was a lot of stuff, okay? A former Pharisee, he would use his knowledge of Jewish scripture to his advantage. A Roman citizen, he would use his Roman citizenship as an advantage for no other reason but to tell people about God. And so he combined the two. He was set apart. People knew who Paul was. They knew that he was different. Even the Romans knew that he was different. And he wasn't going to shy away from those differences. He wasn't going to shy away from that which made the system work for him. He was going to use the system. And you know what he did? He gained an audience with Caesar, and he gained an audience with these local procurators and these local judges and these local rulers. And you know what he did? Hey, let me tell you about something that happened to me on the way to Damascus. Excellent combination. He took his holiness, he set himself apart, he got out into the world, he followed Christ's great commission, and told others about God. That's what we must do. We must make that combination. In other words, we are to be holy as God is holy and fulfill his mandate to tell an unholy world about our holy God. But the main thing to be taken away from the book of Leviticus, from these chapters, yea, verily, from God himself, is that we must be holy. We must be holy unto God. That's the main thing. Other things come secondary, which brings me to my second point. From these chapters, what can we learn from these chapters? We can learn the main thing is holiness, but we can also learn this, the secondary thing, practicality. And I told you we would get to this in a second. So, we've talked about clean and unclean animals, but Leviticus also describes certain situations and illnesses and physical conditions that could make a person clean or unclean. And for that, we looked at chapter 12. Beginning in verse 1, and the Lord spake unto Moses, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, If a woman have conceived seed and born a man-child, then she shall be unclean 7 days, according to the days of the separation. For her infirmity shall she be unclean. Let's jump down to verse, where's the bald guy? Let's jump down to let's go to chapter 13. Verse 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, saying, When a man shall have in the skin of his flesh a rising, a scab, or a bright spot, and it be in the skin of his flesh like the plague of leprosy, then he shall be brought unto Aaron the priest, or unto one of his sons the priest, and the priest shall look on the plague in the skin of the flesh. And when the hair in the plague is turned white, and the plague in the sight be deeper than the skin of his flesh, it is a plague of leprosy. Do you guys see the details here? You see how far into detail God is going to explain these things? Continuing on, the priest shall look on him and pronounce him unclean. Let's look in verse 18. The flesh also in which, even in the skin thereof, was a boil and is healed, and in the place of the boil there be a white rising or a bright spot, white and somewhat reddish, and it shall be showed to the priest. And if, when the priest seeth it, behold, it be in sight lower than the skin, the hair be turned white, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a plague of leprosy broken out of the boil. Such detail, so specific that God takes the time and he's looking at these specific situations and he's saying, this is what makes somebody clean, this is what makes them unclean, this is what you need to do whenever you are pronounced unclean, and these are the things that need to happen. Here's what I was talking about with the bald person. Verse 40 in chapter 13. And the man whose hair is fallen off his head, he is bald, yet is he clean. Whew. Some of y'all were nervous there for a second, weren't you? Verse 42, and if there be in the bald head or bald forehead a white reddish sore, oh, here we go with the leprosy again, okay? And so the point to be taken away from everything that I just read to you was now we've got the animals, the things that we can and cannot eat, but now we're going into certain ailments and illnesses and things that would qualify or disqualify somebody from being clean or unclean. Notice here that God took the time to describe what is and is not considered clean or unclean in his eyes. Have you had a bodily discharge recently? You're unclean, and you need to go through the following steps in order to be clean. Are you bald or balding? Well, you may be a lot of things, but you're not unclean. You're still good. The list is both extensive and specific, reflecting the extensive and specific nature of our God. Specific. Holy. And again, the focus of these regulations was the holiness of the people as they interacted with their holy God. But in this case, with these sicknesses, with these ailments, there's a practical aspect attached onto it. It's the secondary thing. It's not the main thing, but it's the secondary thing. As the secondary thing, it's not unimportant. It's still important, but the main thing is more important. Let me give you an example. If someone had a contagious skin disease, it was good for the overall health of the community to have that person quarantined or declared unclean until the ailment was no longer an issue. Let's look in chapter 13, verse 45. And the leper in whom the plague is, his clothes shall be rent and his head bare, and he shall put a covering upon his upper lip, and shall cry, Unclean, unclean. All the days wherein the plague shall be in him, he shall be defiled. He is unclean. He shall dwell alone without the camp, shall his habitation be. Excuse me. So leprosy is a good example of this dual nature of the main thing and the secondary thing, the holiness and the practicality, spiritual purity and holiness, so on. So since leprosy was highly contagious, a leprous person had to be isolated from the rest of the community, lest the entire peoples catch leprosy, contract it, and die of that incurable disease. But leprosy is also unique in the Bible. You've heard that term before, haven't you? It's not a new term. It returns again and again, both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. It's an object lesson for sin itself. It's incurable, my man, and it slowly destroys a person and ultimately leads to death. That's physical, actual, practical leprosy. That's what happens if a person in the first century, even in the New Testament, contracted leprosy. And it also served to remind the people of God's holiness and expectation for them, both in a functional and in a spiritual sense. If they didn't functionally deal with a leprous person, if they didn't practically deal with a leprous person, they ran a great risk of contracting the disease themselves. If they didn't isolate, they didn't get that person out of the camp, the disease was prone to spread. On top of that, if they didn't spiritually isolate themselves from the paganism around them, they ran the risk of infecting their soul, which, by the way, led to both Judah and Israel's ultimate demise. Their idol worship, the pagan influence of the peoples around them. So, the emphasis also applies today. Our holiness is dependent on God's holiness. We look to Him and Him alone. You see, this world is filled, you guys, with false gods, false teaching. We're surrounded by paganism. It's in popular music. It's on popular TV shows. It's not just horoscopes in the paper anymore. We're surrounded by this stuff, this demonic influence. What do? How do we defend ourselves? How can we keep ourselves safe? The same thing the people in the book of Leviticus did. We stay holy to God. If our souls are somehow influenced by unbiblical falsehoods, we isolate it, get it out of the camp, so that it cannot harm us or further infect us and eventually destroy us from the inside out. So we have a main thing. The main thing is the holiness. We have a secondary thing, very practical, to isolate somebody, say, with leprosy or a sickness, to separate them off until either the sickness was healed or the people recovered from it. And here's the third point I want to make. Y'all have heard this one too. I'm going to say it, and I want you to say it with me. Go ahead and click it over. Keep the main thing the main thing. All right? You've heard that said a great many times. I've said it. Pastor said it. You've heard guest speakers come in here and say it, but I'm not entirely sure anybody knows or knew what it meant up until that point. You've heard my definition, okay? What is the main thing? Being holy to our holy God. Serving God and Him alone. Everything else trickles down. You say, what is life? What is having children all about? You got to raise children and teach them to be good people and so on and so forth. Yes, indeed. That's what I will do with my sons. But I'm not going to do it for the sake of them or myself. I'm going to do it in obedience to God, you see. Why do we come to church? Because we want to fellowship with our fellow Christians. We want to trade recipes and talk about whether we're going to use Crisco or butter in our pie crusts. That's going to happen. Fellowship will happen. We love to fellowship at church. But the reason we come to church, that's main thing stuff. We come to worship God. If there was no fellowship involved, if there was no trading of recipes, we would still come to church because the main thing is God, to worship God, to stay holy to God. So at one point during Jesus' ministry, he confronted the Pharisees for this continual emphasis on the outward cleanliness. In other words, the secondary things. Even as they ignored the spiritual corruption. Luke 11, beginning in verse 39, it says, "And the Lord said unto him, Now do ye Pharisees make clean the outside of the cup and the platter, but your inward part is full of ravening and wickedness. Ye fools, did not he that made that which is without make that which is within also?" Fools, Jesus called them. So you look pretty on the outside. God made the outside. But guess what? God made the inside too. That's what Jesus is telling these Pharisees. So this is why you hear me coming back again and again to the concept of holiness. The restrictions and the rituals, they were functional. They were practical in certain ways, but they find their roots in holiness, in the inwardness. Not the outwardness, but the inwardness. To put it another way, we cannot affect an inner change with an outer change. You can't change the inside by dressing up the outside. There were certain things that set the Israelites apart from the rest of the ancient world. But those things didn't save the people. Let me give you some examples based on what we've talked about this evening. The Israelites were not allowed to eat certain things. It set them apart from the rest of the world around them. But those restrictions didn't save the Israelites. The Israelites were required to make sacrifices in a certain way with a certain manner that was different from the rest of the world around them. Listen, the sacrifices didn't save the people. It was their belief and their faith and their trust in the one who commanded the sacrifices. See the difference? That's what keeping the main thing means. Imagine a nice linoleum floor in your kitchen. Look how great it looks. You got it in your head? Look how great that kitchen floor looks. It's nice. You walk in, you go up to the door, you walk up, you see it down there, and it looks really good. The colors are sharp, the surface is clean, but as soon as you step on that kitchen floor, on that linoleum, it feels kind of squishy under your feet. It's not solid. There's been a leak. That leak has rotted the floor away. What looks so nice on the outside is rotten and moldy and disgusting on the inside, and you want nothing to do with that. So what do? Well, a lot of people just ignore it. It's a soft spot. Other people want to get rid of it. That's what it means whenever we're talking about this idea of outward versus inward. To put it another way, eating certain things and wearing certain things and doing certain things means nothing outside of the faith required toward the one who demands those certain things. The Pharisees had obedience to the law down pat. They looked really good. They knew all the stuff. They sang all the right songs. And yet Jesus confirmed, accused them, and rightfully said that inside they were rotten. They looked the part. They looked good on the outside. They'd gotten caught up in the functional and they'd forgotten about the spiritual. Even today, it's easy for us to focus on the external elements of what people understand to be Christianity, right? Going to church, tithing, doing good things, not doing bad things, not cursing, not stealing, lying, so on, so on, so on. We get caught up in those things. Now, obviously, God's people should demonstrate righteousness. Again, it's not binary. These things go together. But the main thing requires that we must never forget outward actions have never been the end goal of God's laws or statutes. He's always been after our spiritual condition. He wants us to be perfectly holy as he is perfectly holy. The way you dress, Christian, the way you dress, it's important, but it's not going to save you. Dress as nice as you want. Get matching socks and pocket square. Salvation doesn't come from matching socks and pocket square. Christian, you can sing the right songs, but those songs aren't going to save you. My brother Kevin back there has said this many times. He sang up here in the choir before he was saved. And I could hear him too. And he enjoyed it, according to him. And so did I. And then, a few years later, Kevin was saved. It wasn't the songs that saved Kevin. It was Christ. It was the inward change that saved him. Christian, tithing is important. Tithing is not going to save you. let's poke the bear a little bit. Your political alignment is not going to save you. Your opinions are not going to save you. This, that, or the other, that's not going to save you. Only faith in Jesus Christ will save you. Faith in Jesus Christ does not affect an outward change. Not immediately. It affects an inward change. And from the inward change comes the outward changes. See the difference? Inward change, the main thing. Outward changes, the secondary things. And that's what it means to keep the main thing the main thing. Keep on target, you guys. Same thing goes whenever we're combating Satan. See, whenever, sometimes I feel like I'm giving people a cop-out answer whenever they say, Josh, why is this happening in the world, this, that, or the other? And I tell them sin. That's the strict answer. Everything can be traced back to it. We had a nice conversation about that in youth group last Wednesday. I was given certain scenarios, and they could all be traced back to the fact that there's sin in this world. And so what do? We got to make sure that when we're combating our sinfulness, our sinful desires within, we can't make a target on the outside things. And we can't make a change on the outside expecting a change to be on the inside. The only way to defeat Satan and sin is by putting faith and trust in Jesus. The only way. We can try something else, but it won't work. It can't work. So God's statutes emphasize how crucial obedience is by teaching his people how to obey him in every single mundane detail of life. That's what makes, I'm going to say it. I know you guys will understand when I say this, okay? That's what makes Leviticus boring. Mundane details. But there's purpose to all those mundane details. God is trying to teach his people, and he's trying to teach us holiness, the importance of obedience. We look at those statutes and we might think of them, statutes, and might think of them as over the top or too much or too involved, but God gave them with a specific goal in mind. He told these people to be separate, unique from the people around them, behave like the treasured possession that they were. And this meant everything: sacrifices, rituals, diet, even clothing and cooking, all carefully ordered by God for the purpose of teaching holiness. And the regulations were an external illustration of the separation from sin God's people were to practice in their hearts. Because the Lord is their God, they were to be utterly distinct. Sure, there were practical applications to the law, just as there were spiritual applications. But the spiritual applications were the foundation and the bedrock. They were the main thing. And so as you go through life, Christian, as you go through next week, yea, verily, as you go through this evening, don't let the secondary things take over. Keep the main thing the main thing. You do that, and the rest will trickle down like a beautiful fountain from the top down throughout the rest of your life and the rest of your contacts and your family members and your household and everything else that you come in contact with. You keep the main thing, I promise you, it's going to be all right. Let's pray. God, I thank you, Lord, once again for this opportunity to preach your word. Lord, I pray that you would take the things that we've learned from your word, God, and apply them to our hearts. Help us to take them with us throughout the rest of the week. I pray that you would bless each person here, Lord. I pray that you would continue to be with them throughout the rest of this day, the rest of their time here, throughout the rest of their week. I pray, God, that you would help us to reach out to some unsaved person. Lord, use us that an unsaved person might come to faith in your Son, Jesus. I ask it in your name. Amen. Let's all stand, please. Next week, this week we've talked about uncleanness. Yuck. Uncleanliness. But wouldn't you know it, God gave us a prescription for that uncleanness. And that's what we're going to be studying next week in our journey through the book of Leviticus. So this week I want you to find somebody that you know, or maybe a family member or a friend or somebody like that doesn't know Jesus on a personal level. They're not saved or anything like that. And take some time to tell them about your holy God and what he's done for you and how he's changed you from the inside out. Not the outside in, you guys, but from the inside out. God bless you. Have a great evening and a good rest of your week. Take care of yourself. You are dismissed.